James Bond has driven many cars, but this is the Bond car by which all others will always be measured.
Well, it's a 1964 Aston Martin DB5, and it was one of the most expensive cars that were built coming out of England in that time.
4 of these cars were produced for Goldfinger and Thunderball. Today, there are only 3 survivors. This car is one of them.
First car was built as known as the effects car. It had some of the gadgets on it. The second one was built as a road car for some of the long shots and some of the high-speed driving scenes.
For the past 35 years, this car has been in storage and on display at the Smoky Mountain Car Museum in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. Each of the 4 originals is a little different. For instance, a close-up on the front-mounted machine guns in Goldfinger reveals a slightly different barrel shape on this car than the guns on this car. Aston Martin's Director of Communications, Tim Watson, says, in a way, it was James Bond who helped define what Aston Martin is all about.
I think in the first year, in 1964-65, when the Goldfinger contract was signed for us to supply the DB5, which is what most people assume that we still make today, the James Bond car, it doubled sales overnight.
There's this car, the sister car to it, that's in a museum in Holland. And then there's another car that was used in the film as in a private collection.
This James Bond DB5 is far from mint. The seats are well worn. But replacing the upholstery would do nothing to enhance this car's value. It's valuable because it's all original, blemishes and all.
Well, this car's equipped with just about everything an international spy would need. We have hydraulic rams on the front and back if you get into a tight spot. We have a radio telephone in here, a tracking device to track your criminals. We have an ejection seat that was originally in here, has been since removed for safety purposes. This also has a rotating license plates. The car has Browning .30 caliber machine guns, non-functional of course, but they do make a lot of noise. And that settling propane system that fires them.
Most of the spy gadgets on this car are for show. Special effects had to be used to make them appear real. The tire slicer, for instance, doesn't really slide out of the axle. This was an effect created in the studio. This car does come with a tire slicer, but it has to be attached manually.
The fellow that designed and engineered all these gadgets was a fellow named John Spears. And you might not recognize the name, but you'll recognize what he's done with this car, as well as the cars was used in Thunderball, which he actually won an Academy Award for. And later on in 1976, he did another movie that you might recognize. He was a fellow that did the lightsaber and R2-D2 and the land speeder and a lot of the special effects for Star Wars, which he also won an Academy Award for.
The spy gadgets like the acetylene and propane system for the guns and the oil spreader added a lot of weight to this car. But even after all these years in storage, this James Bond DB5 can still run with the best of them.
It's a great performance car. It's good for 140, 150 miles an hour, inline 6, 3 carbs, a fabulous car to drive in itself. And it was chosen because it was British and the production company was British, and it was a good little patriotic thing to do, I think, at the time. And it did some wonderful things for Aston Martin sales, and they went on to build, I believe, about 800 of these cars were built. They're all handmade, aluminum body. Very, very desirable car in itself, aside from the James Bond gadgets on it.
This car is street legal, and it has been driven. And in our books, that makes it even cooler. Imagine working at a lube shop and somebody pulls up in the James Bond car. This car was taken in for an oil change back in 1993 at just over 17,000 miles.
As well as you'll see a map here of, this one is particularly London, which will give you, once your tracking device is installed in the villain's car, you're able to track him and follow him literally around the world. So that was back in the days before computers.
This example of the James Bond DB5 was auctioned off for a staggering $2.1 million.
Yes, he's had quite an interesting lineup of cars and throughout the different actors that portrayed James Bond, but it always will be the most famous of all the James Bond cars, and even the other models that they made, the DB2 and 3 and 4 and 6, were also affectionately known as James Bond cars, but the DB5 is really the true car of the Bond movies. It'll always be remembered as such.
It has been hidden away for decades, but James Bond's original spy car has resurfaced. It went on the auction block, in fact, in London and fetched over $4 million tonight, making it one of the most expensive vintage cars ever sold. But before it changed hands, we went to kick the tires, see if that ejection seat really works. Here's our foreign editor, Stuart Greer.
It's arguably the world's most famous car, and now it's getting more attention from movie and auto buffs, shaken and stirred by the unique opportunity to own a piece of movie and motor history.
This car is phenomenal.
You'll be using this Aston Martin DB5 with modifications.
The 1964 model appeared in the Bond films Goldfinger and Thunderball, and it's had just one rather reckless driver, Sean Connery, who used the car's defenses, like the smokescreen and oil slick, to confound his enemies.
The correlation of this car with the character of James Bond was absolute perfection in cinema. The character was sophisticated, powerful, elegant, and somewhat deadly. And so is the car.
The twin machine guns, of course, never fired actual bullets, and...
Ejector seat? You're joking.
Actually, yes, it never really worked either. This was just a special effect. Since 1969, the car's been owned by Philadelphia radio tycoon Jerry Lee. He bought it for just $12,000 from the Aston Martin factory, and he's never driven it.
And so for the last 41 years, it sat in my house in my James Bond room, and it was great for parties.
Lee's selling to raise cash for his crime-fighting charity, but the car was overhauled first by a company in Ontario.
All of the original movie gadgets are still fully intact. It's fantastic. Here in the armrest, you have your oil, your nails, your smoke, your machine gun. Of course, you'd have to be as rich as a supervillain with a stash of gold bullion in an underground lair to afford all this.
A tempting buy for some high rollers.
This is a good collector's car. I'm sure we'll probably have a think about it tonight, but I think it's going to make a lot of money.
Possibly more than any vintage car ever sold. The price for what many say is the greatest movie car ever. Stuart Greer, Global News, London.